then we'll dive right in.
Right. Great. Hello, everyone. You are most welcome to our empowerment session where, we bring experts in different fields from across the globe to share with us and the wider community their insights and experience. For every human interaction, most certainly, it's imperative that we take some ground rules. And then, as always, kindly ensure your microphones are muted. Kindly ensure your microphones are always muted unless you are given the platform to speak. It is advised that you keep a journal to take note of key submissions, and then you need to always keep an open mind. Keep an open mind and always ask questions. Right. So research has proven that the average person spends over 90,000 hours working. And when we convert that into years, it's over a decade, right? And most of us in the corporate world spend most of our time working without paying attention to our well-being, which most certainly is very important. Thankfully, we have two experts in this field to share with us their insights and knowledge on how to promote well-being in the workplace. Without much ado, I want to, move to introducing our resource persons. To give you an idea of who John Beale is, Jonathan Beale, PhD, is a research affiliate in Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University and a peak performance coach for the Flow Research Collective. He has previously held position as fellow in philosophy at Harvard, academic visitor at St. Anthony's College, University of Oxford, and research in residence at Eton College. His research focuses on the philosophy of human flourishing, its role in education, and how to best support the flourishing of students. He is co-editor of 4 books on philosophy and education, including The Future of Education, Reimagining its aim and responsibility. He has published articles in academic journals and media outlets, including the New York Times. Wow. He has co-hosted a podcast on Flourish FM, sponsored by Human Flourishing Program and the Department of Education at Oxford. And to give you an overview of who Dr. Gloria Agyemang is, Gloria Agyemang is a professor of accounting and current head of School of Business and Management at Royal Holloway, University of London, and holds PhD in management from the University of London, receiving her undergraduate degree at the University of Ghana and her postgraduate at McGill University, Canada. She has both management and teaching experience at UK and African universities. Gloria's diverse research interests include accounting and race, culture and diversity issues, NGO accountability, management control and performance management in public sector organizations, the management of education institutions, accounting and sustainability management in emerging economies, accounting for migration, immigration, and accounting for crime. Aren't these bios of our guests just amazing? Farida, over to you if you're ready.
Thank you, Pat. So, like I said, amazing guests. So I hope we did a good introduction, Jonathan and Gloria. If you would like to add anything, please feel free to add if we need to add anything to your introductions. So we'll dive right in. And how this will go is that we have a couple of questions that we'll go through and we'll give, depending on the time, because we have to close in 1 hour. Depending on the time, we'll give our panelists some time to talk about each of the areas from their own experience. So I'll take the first question. And these questions really were sent in by team members. So these are the things that they really want to know concerning well-being in the workplace. So the first one is, how do we create an environment where staff feel comfortable coming forward with well-being issues? I'll start with Gloria and then Jonathan.
I think that's a very loaded question. It's a big question that requires breaking down, because well-being is a combination of physical well-being, mental mental well-being. So it's not a simple topic. I think if we take it very generally, I think people need to be happy at work. People need to be satisfied with what they're doing at work. I mean, I noticed that John's book is about human flourishing, and I think that's the essence of well-being, creating an environment that will enable people um, to flourish in their work, both personally and professionally. Okay, so it requires effort from both the managers, the leaders in the department or the organization, as well as the um, the individuals who are working within the organization. It's a loaded question, so let me leave it at that, so that perhaps John can come in and add to it, and then as we go on with the questions, we'll be delving more and more into the detail of how do we create this environment.
Yeah, thank you
Okay.
very much. Thank you very much, Gloria, and thank you very much, Farida and Fard, for hosting this excellent event and for those lovely introductions. First of all, I mean, it's important to clarify what exactly we mean by well-being. I take it we're going to use this term quite broadly here, so physical and mental well-being, but perhaps also relational well-being or well-being in relation to others and with others. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we're discussing this very broadly. I assume that's what we have in mind here, well-being in the broadest sense. How do we create an environment where staff feel comfortable going forward with issues relating to that? Well, building on what Gloria was saying there, I mean, the first is I think one important step is to make it quite a normal thing to do, to normalize it so it's not seen as an odd thing to do to come forward with a well-being issue. So you're not standing out in some way. So it's part of the conversation in an institution. It's part of what's kind of quite an ordinary thing to talk about, and that can't happen overnight. But if you could try to encourage staff to feel safe discussing these things, both with their peers, but also in more formal environments, so opening up a conversation with their line manager, with their boss, with their colleagues about some issue concerning the well-being, and that's something that one tends to do within the institution, and trying to create a cultural atmosphere where that takes place. You might also do that with all well-being issues. For example, it might be easier to do with particular physical well-being issues than mental health well-being issues, or maybe it's more difficult to do with relational well-being issues, issues concerning one's relationships than with physical well-being matters. But to see where progress can be made in normalizing that, and to encourage staff to open up about these kinds of things and make it clear that it's a safe space to have these conversations, that you're not going to be judged for opening up that conversation, for having a well-being issue, and for telling your boss about it, telling your colleagues about it. That's kind of a necessary, I think, first step to be made if you're going to create any kind of environment where this can happen. Gloria, what do you think of that?
I agree with you. I think it's particularly important for the organization to make the discussion of well-being safe. It should be seen as a safe environment. I mean, you don't want people to come and talk to you about their well-being with a fear that by my admitting that I feel stressed or that I can't cope, they're going to lose their job. People don't. That's not the what you're trying to achieve. People should be able to explain why. They should be able to come up to you as the organization or as the manager to tell them, I'm not feeling this. I mean, at the end of the day, people often find it easy to say, I've got malaria, so I'm not coming in. I've got flu. I've broken my arm, I'm not coming in. That's something that we all take for granted. And we should be doing the similar thing with well-being. We should be able to say to our bosses, this is what's happening and its impact on me is this, without that latent fear of perhaps, oh, I must keep this quiet, otherwise I'll lose my job. So the environment, the welcoming environment, the safe environment And also, I think also the private environment, in the sense that I should be able to say I have had a mental problem in the past few weeks. I've fallen apart without the fear that everybody in the organization is going to hear, and therefore they're going to point. They're going to point it at this. There goes that guy who fell apart. You know, so it's a welcoming, safe environment that we should be aiming for.
Absolutely. I entirely agree. And it's great examples I think Gloria's given there, because those are well-being issues. If someone's broken a bone or is, contracted malaria or something, these are well-being issues. They affect your physical health, and they could also affect your mental health. But we don't tend to apply that for certain other things. So I'm struggling in my marriage, and that's impacting my sleep, and I would like to request, some time off work as a result of that. For example, trying to kind of expand the safe space of the kinds of things one can communicate about with one's colleagues and one's boss, and these being taken seriously, legitimately by an organization. I think that's a kind of really important groundwork for creating this culture. I think another point to make here is that the organization to recognize, business organization, whatever sphere we're talking about here, to recognize and to make explicit that they care about their staff well-being, but also they see the direct relation between staff well-being and work, because there is a direct relation, right? If a member of staff isn't sleeping well or isn't feeling well, they're not going to be working as well as they could. There's going to be a direct one-to-one relation there. You're not going to be as productive as you can be, as well, as focused as you can be. Your cognition won't be as high if you haven't slept very well, if you haven't eaten as well as you usually do, if there's a lot on your mind, if you're extremely stressed. And so it's in any business's or organization's interest to take well-being extremely seriously, but also communicate with their staff, so there isn't this kind of odd dichotomy that's drawn between well-being and work. Because it's a really bizarre dichotomy to draw, because they are directly related. Work impacts well-being and well-being impacts work. But any organization, any leader can make that a lot clearer as part of a means of cultivating this kind of environment.
Mm-hmm. I was talking with Kat. I'm not sure, John, you know Kat, don't you? Yeah.
Kat's, I know Kat.
Yeah. I was talking with Kat earlier on, and she was commenting that there's a sense that, well, she was commenting about the need for people to be a bit more open, because things come out of the blue. She hears things out of the blue. There hasn't been the groundwork made, and so the sense is that she doesn't know about people's well-being. On the face of it, people seem to be happy, satisfied. Then out of the blue, something happens. Okay, of course, life is full of jack in the boxes. You can have something happening all of a sudden. But there's also a lot of situations where things are festering. Things are happening, and as John said, having a problem in your marriage, that's the sort of thing as Ghanaians generally don't talk about. Having a problem of Ghanaians, or having a problem of parents, it's something that we generally don't talk about. But then indirectly, or perhaps even directly, it begins to impact on people's work. They're not putting in that daily email that is expected. They're not meeting their quota of tasks and things that they should do. It's because that problem perhaps is festering, and it's hidden. And yet, if the environment has been created such that it's safe for them to knock on the door of Farida or Fad or Mohammed or whoever is the boss, to talk to them and say, well, look, this is what's happening. So things will be a bit slow for the time being, okay? And I like John's point that well-being affects the organization, affects the organization. Well, together, it's very difficult to separate them. If you have a situation where everybody is unhappy, the work is not going to progress. And so creating that safe environment for people to feel able to talk about the jack in the boxes, that is the once in a while things that happen, as well as those background festering issues, is absolutely important.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gloria. You are muted, Farida.
Sorry. So as a manager, would you encourage me to take the first step to model openness to my team? So for instance, my team we're pretty new, like 6 months old together or less. So would you encourage that I be open in terms of my own wellness issues, and that will probably encourage my team members to come forward if they have any issues that they're struggling with?
I don't know, John. That's a difficult one. John, do you want to try and then I'll add to it?
I know I'd absolutely say yes. I'd recommend doing that. Modeling. You mentioned the word modeling there. Modeling is a very effective teaching and learning practice. When a teacher models something, that's, research shows that that's a very effective method of teaching and learning. A teacher models some practice, let's say how to perform some, method in science or mathematics to students, and then demonstrates to students how that's best done, in an exemplary way, and then students follow the lead. And research suggests that you see, modeling having good effects in training in other sectors too. So yes, applying that kind of model to a leadership structure and to the notion of training people for the kinds of to cultivate the kind of environment that you would ideally like to see and would best for staff well-being, absolutely do model that. People are going to follow your lead as the leader within your team, right? You're going, by you illustrating something, they're more likely to see that as something that is normal to do, permissible to do, and encouraged. And so I think there's various ways you could model that. You could model it as a kind of, I want you all to know today that I'm personally struggling with something right now, to open up, to be honest, if there is something you're struggling with, to illustrate that, and not kind of expect others to do that kind of thing there and then, but to encourage them to do so in one-to-one settings with you or in group settings, whatever they feel comfortable with, and to make it clear they won't be judged, and that you take very seriously the kind of things we've been discussing, the impact of well-being on work, the impact of work on well-being, but also even beyond that, caring for your team's health and well-being more broadly, and wanting them to be the best people they can be. Yes, I would strongly encourage you to do that, Farida.
And then having said that, I think also as a leader, you have to be mindful about what it is that you're modeling, okay? You want to model something that is positive so that people can learn from you. And yet you must be careful not to cross the boundary where if you I don't know how to put it. When I became a leader, the person who I inherited told me, do not go to the pub with your mates. Don't go drinking with your mates, because if you go drinking with your mates, you might end up saying things, management things that should be kept private. Okay. And I thought deeply about that. And for the first few months, I did not socialize. I created that boundary between me and staff. But then over time, I realized that actually you can socialize. You can give of yourself, but you should be mindful of how much it is that you're giving. You don't want to give of yourself to such an extent that nobody takes you seriously. You can't turn around and ask somebody to do X, Y, or Z, or people begin to ridicule you. So there's a boundary. I think as a manager, you must always be aware that you give of yourself. You share. You are humane and authentic, without necessarily just being completely open. Because I think that also has an effect on your well-being. If you are 100% open about everything, and then you get the blowback from the team, then of course that's eventually has an impact on your well-being. That's why I said that first question was a big question. It's loaded. Over to you, John.
Well, no, I agree with you. So yeah, I certainly wasn't suggesting by creating an open culture and by modeling to have no filter. No, I'm not suggesting you were implying that, but to not have any filter at all and just to lay out all your emotion, all your emotional struggles and so on, the things you're enduring right now. But more to model what good practice would look like. And it might not be that you necessarily open up with something. It might be, you kind of just declare that you invite people to, if there's anything on their mind that isn't strictly work related, that they can open up to you about that, and you will take it seriously, and it would be an important subject of conversation. Indeed, you would rather people open up to you about these kinds of things than they don't feel they have an opportunity to do so, or maybe they're identified too late for things to be done that could help. For example, reducing work hours, taking some time off, helping one another out within the team such that someone, say, doesn't burn out or become too overwhelmed with stress because, let's say, they're not sleeping well, but they haven't said anything about it. So yes, of course, have a filter there. It says set out some boundaries. And I mean, I think socializing with colleagues in various ways, that's a different kind of topic here than opening about certain well-being issues. Yeah, I would agree with Gloria's point for sure.
You're muted, Farida.
Sorry. Thank you. So let's jump to the next point. How do we avoid burnout whilst continuing to be a positive force for change?
Are you talking about managers?
Everybody now, volunteers, managers, staff members.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Let's start, John.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the first thing, it's first important to understand what burnout is, because a lot of people think of burnout as pure exhaustion, and it is that, but it isn't simply exhaustion as a result of work overload and pressure. It's almost always going to involve a high degree of stress, but there are multiple things that can cause burnout and a set of things together that can cause it. And it's important to kind of have a better understanding of that to really then figure out how to avoid it and how to set up an organization such that it can be mitigated. This is something we actually, so you mentioned at the start, one of my roles is I work as a coach, for a peak performance coach for the Flow Research Collective. One of the areas of our training there is how to limit the risk of burnout. And something we talk about there is research done by Christina Maslach, I believe in the 70s, where she identified some of the key contributors to burnout, and 6 burnout triggers she identified. One is work overload, but then there are 5 others. One is lack of autonomy or lack of control. Another is values conflict, where your values, your personal values clash with those of the organization you work for or the people you're working with. Another is insufficient reward. You don't feel you're paid adequately for what you're doing, or given sufficient time off, let's say. Another is unfairness. Someone might be doing the same job as you but paid more than you. And another is lack of community. And we want to pay attention to each of those, because if we think someone is at risk of burnout but we've identified wrong potential cause of that, then we're not going to take the best action we can to limit their risk of burnout and potentially overcome it. So, for example, I can imagine, I haven't seen the research on burnout since the pandemic, but I can well imagine that lack of community may well have been the strongest burnout trigger during the pandemic rather than work overload. I also don't know if work overload is the most common trigger, but I can well imagine it is. So the first step would be to understand better what burnout is and what factors contribute to it. And then to try to identify where particular staff members or maybe a set, such as a team, are at highest risk, and then pull in strategies to try and reduce that. And the question was, how do we avoid burnout whilst continuing to be a positive force for change? So attend to all of those areas to try and reduce it. Then you also want to continue to be a positive force for change. I think reducing burnout would increase the likelihood you could do that, because you're going to be able to work better, be able to control your energy better, do your job with more enjoyment and so on. But one thing to bear in mind is, if someone puts themselves under a huge degree of pressure, let's say, to be a positive force for change, that itself could contribute towards burnout if that itself is, say, a huge stressor in their life, if that is something where their personal values maybe don't fit with others in the organization, if they maybe not on the same page in terms of what positive force for change means. So, as it were, looking at what change an organization or a person is trying to bring about and how that sits with the overall aims of the team, the people they're working with, the organization as a whole, and how that can best be put forward whilst limiting the risk of each of those triggers I've mentioned. That's one way of thinking about the connection between these issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with John there, especially the point that I think it's so important that he's made that point and he's identified four or five different ways in which burnout can happen. You know, burnout means different things and it can be triggered by different things. So it's important for you as the manager, for yourself, for you for the team to be able to identify, well, what's causing this burnout. What's I mean, I gave the example of people not being able to cope with a task and therefore working extremely long hours in order to achieve it. Of course, it's not healthy to be working extremely long hours. And also, but behind the long hours is the key cause. Perhaps the values are different. Perhaps what you're doing, you haven't got the skills for, you know. And I think again, I've been discussing with several people about what do you do in such situations. Sometimes, if the manager recognizes it or the person talks about how they're feeling, sometimes it's worth taking a step back and asking yourself as the individual, is this the right thing for me to be doing at this point in time? You know, it's the manager can also kindly ask it, are you really enjoying what you're doing? Is this what you should be? Is this right for you at this time? But the point, of course, is several reasons underpinning the burnout. Let's find out what those reasons are, and then let's find ways and means of supporting the individual. And some of that support might be telling them, you need to consider moving on. I'm giving hard messages. Say you need to consider moving on. It's not the right job for you. That's the ultimate final thing that you can do to preserve yourself. But John is absolutely right. It depends upon why is there burnout? What are the underpinning issues, and how before we can think about how we can contribute to solve the problem.
Yeah, and just to add on that, thank you very much. There's great points Gloria's made. I think there two things to add to that. One thing I think Gloria said was very powerful there is there being the option to have a conversation with someone you work with or someone who works, to whom you are their line manager. Let's say you're in a managerial position and you're their line manager, you're their boss in other terms. For it to be a potential option for you to suggest to them, look, are you sure this is the right role for you? Because I do think that an important role any leader should have is to help each individual on their best path towards their greatest goals, their own professional development. And that might be in a different organization working for a different person. And that, that's a difficult role, I think, for leaders to have if they want to keep that member of staff in the team, but to be unbiased and objective about this. Say, well, I think what's in your best interest is actually to be looking at this job for this organization or this step in your career, which would ultimately take you away from us. But, this is what's best for you. And that itself might be a way of curing or avoiding burnout if, for example, one of the triggers at play is a clash of values with the organization you're currently working for. And you try to help them to move to a different organization. Another thing to say is on the subject of long hours, of course, working long hours is going to be a contributing factor to work-related exhaustion. but we shouldn't too quickly identify working long hours with burnout, except for extremely long hours. You know, if people are doing 120-hour weeks, then yes, sure. But, you know, doing something like a 70-hour week, if someone finds a huge sense of deep meaning and purpose in the work they're doing, and it really supports their personal values, try to convince them to work less and less. If they're managing their life well in other ways, you know, they've got good nutrition, they're exercising well, they're sleeping well, but they are working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. It's possible to do that. Many people do that. That shouldn't be the kind of first thing we move to try and address issues concerning burnout. And I think people often do that. They're like, oh, you're working all these hours. Don't do that. You know, just leave the office earlier, go and do something else. But if they really are imbued with a huge, deep sense of meaning and purpose from their work, and they're not working crazy hours, and their life in other respects they've got good well-being in other ways, that maybe shouldn't be the way things are going. And in fact, working longer hours can sometimes be a way to avoid burnout if the possible causes of burnout are things such as you're not really feeling at home in the organization you're working for. So on top of doing the work you're doing, you need to also be applying for other jobs, interviewing for other jobs, which requires more work. So your hours actually have to increase to overcome the risk of burnout. So of course, long hours is an issue, but I don't think we should immediately jump on that as the primary factor.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the third point, how do we cope with pressure or stress in a dynamic work environment like EduSpots? Gloria, we'll start with you.
How do we cope with
Pressure or stress? Yes.
in a dynamic work environment? I mean, I'll start with the point that John ended with there. Okay. Sometimes people get a buzz from a dynamic work environment, you know. So even though there's pressure, it's exciting them and they're enjoying it. Okay, and they're enjoying it. So it's not a matter of having to cope. It's actually, I'm enjoying this. I'm getting a buzz from it. Okay, the environment is dynamic. So whereas other people may not be able to cope well in a fast-changing environment. And I think again, it comes back to why is the person feeling the pressure? What stress is the person feeling, and why? And being able to talk about it. Being able to, because if you're having to cope, the suggestion is that perhaps you're not enjoying it. Okay, because I find that most things that I enjoy doing, I do without paying attention to the impact on taking me away from family, for example, for a short period of time, for being unhappy at work, because I'm enjoying it. So if the person is if the operative word is cope, it's to me, it suggests that the individual is not enjoying, and then that's when the conversations, communications, the why needs to be introduced. I mean, John might be able to add to that from a more analytical perspective, because I'm talking about it from experience. When I have felt that I need to cope, I haven't felt that I've needed to cope to the extent that it begins to wear on me. It begins to wear down on my well-being because of something else, which makes the environment difficult. I'm not sure, John, if I'm making sense there.
Yeah, I think you're making perfect sense. So, I mean, let's just clarify again. Sorry, I know I'm clarifying these terms first every time. So it's my background in philosophy is what people who've studied too much philosophy tend to do. We get a bit obsessed with the meanings of words. Excuse me. But let's just focus on this word dynamic here. So dynamic meaning, I take it, characterized by rapid change or constant change, regular change, and so on. So we're thinking about how we cope with pressure or stress in that kind of environment. There's lots of change going on. some people relish change and respond very well to change. Other people, not so well. I think, Gabrielle, can you mute your microphone? Or Fard, if you have the power to mute Gabrielle's microphone, if you could mute Gabrielle's microphone, just click on the top right and click mute. Thank you. Pressure or stress, how could you reduce that in such an environment? Well, one way would be to try to give some lead-in time to where there are going to be these substantial changes, because they're going to impact many levels potentially of an organization and many people within an organization, right? So rather than being sudden change, within an hour of something happening, or the next day, hey, tomorrow we're going to change this system, this process, this way of doing things, try to give some lead-in time to something, try to give a heads up as much as possible. Of course, with the caveat that sometimes these kinds of things come at you from nowhere and unexpected, and you can't do that. But trying to kind of prepare people for these things, because change can have a cascading negative exponential impact on people's workflows, schedules, ways of working. Some people, respond to that very well, adapt very well in response to that. Some people not so much, especially if they've got other stresses going on. So I do think that trying to give a heads up to staff about how much there's dynamism in an organization, how much a change is coming on the horizon, so they're prepared for it, can really help to reduce stress and pressure. But at the same time, you do want to make sure your team's prepared for these things when they happen. So it shouldn't be the case that this never happens, or it always has to be a kind of heads up warning, but trying where possible to do that, whilst reminding people that sometimes there may be these things that are unpredictable, and we've got to respond appropriately.
Again, sorry. Great, thank you. So the fourth question, how do we take critical feedback positively? We'll start with Gloria again. Gloria, I'm muted.
My
We love
turn to be
muting her.
muted. Sorry about that. Yeah. I think it depends upon how it is given. Feedback often is critical. Even when it's meant as positive feedback, the person receiving it a lot of times feels that it is a criticism of their performance, or in some way or the other, even though the intention is not. The intention of feedback should be to help the person grow, okay, to help the person grow. So it should be balanced in terms of the good aspects, but you could also consider this, so I hardly ever, and I think it should be hardly ever, managers, authentic managers should not go all out to crush people with critical feedback. And I've said authentic managers who care for their team members. Okay, and the purpose of the feedback should be clear. While we're doing the feedback, it's important to share, and it's the language used with the feedback. Even if you're giving a critique or negative feedback, even the language used should be one that removes the pain from the individual. And again, with authentic managers who actually care about their staff are able to do that. Then, of course, as you give the feedback, I think it's important to ask individuals what they feel, what they think about what you said, ideas about change. And one thing I have used in the past is to have the feedback. We have the feedback session, we have the discussion, and then a follow-on feedback session from the individual, for the individual to inform me so that I get a sense of how has this person heard the message? How has this person heard the message? Has the person heard the message correctly or properly, or has the person just heard only negatives? So I think, again, with all of these things, communication is important. Authenticity is important. And I really don't think there are any, maybe there are in the world, real bastards who want to make people's lives hell by crushing them. Maybe, John, you've come across a few of those whose purpose is to kill you off with negative feedback.
I mean, I've definitely met people in my life that give a lot more negative feedback than constructive criticism, we might call it instead, or positive remarks, for sure. I think this question is really important because there is a real lack of critical feedback often among people in all areas of life. People generally don't like to give critical feedback and don't like receiving it either. And we often make excuses for it. Someone criticizes us, we're like, I was tired that day, that's why it didn't go so well. Or, I know I should do that really well, that day I just didn't care very much or something. And we hate giving it, even arguably even more. It's very awkward to tell someone they didn't do something very well. At least most of us find it that way, except the kind of people Gloria has in mind that go around crushing others, to use that term. But it's super important. It's actually, research suggests it's really important for developing what's called our metacognition. So metacognition is your awareness of your own level of knowledge and skills and the ability to do something about that to improve. So you've got metacognitive knowledge, which is, how well calibrated your own awareness, your knowledge and skill set are. And then metacognitive self-regulation, it's called, which is the ability to then identify areas of improvement and actually do something about it. And most people have pretty poor metacognition, and research suggests that one of the reasons that is because we don't give enough negative feedback. So you don't have enough information to go by in terms of how you should improve. It's like, oh, they told me I'm really good at this. They told me I'm great at this. My family are praising me for how good at this. My friends, they tell me I'm great at this. Therefore, I'm probably really good at it. On top of that, your own, biases coming into it. It can be the other way as well. It can tilt negatively too. And that would be an example of poor metacognition as well. If someone has very low self-esteem and they think they're really bad at something, but they're actually quite good at it, in spite of the evidence suggesting they're good, that would again be bad metacognition. Good metacognition is where you've got good calibration there, accuracy. Good feedback, I mean good feedback in actually not positive feedback, but good feedback as in reliable feedback, is important to improve metacognitive skills, and critical feedback is important to that. And the question, how do we take critical feedback positively? Part of that's to create a culture where it's normal to give critical feedback. There are some cultures in which it really isn't very normal to do that, where people wouldn't speak up in a meeting with their peers and actually say something critical. And there are some cultures where it's quite normal to do that kind of thing. This, going back to your question, point, Farida, about modeling, is where maybe that could come in well here. You could, a leader could, for example, conduct an exercise with their team where they get one another to perform some activity. Let's say have a short 5-minute practice teaching session on some topic, and each member of the team is invited to comment on one thing they did really well and one thing they have to improve upon. Right, so then everyone has to give some critical feedback, including, let's say, to you, Farida, if you're the leader of the team, you participate in this, and so your team have to give you critical feedback too. They don't just give you that, give you something positive too, but you encourage them to do it, and you thank one another for the feedback when you get it, to foster that atmosphere of positive reception and critical feedback. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to work on this area I need to improve upon. Thanks to your input there, I now know what I need to do to improve. Such that they're encouraged to do it again. Right? If you tell your team as a leader that they did something really good, they're going to want to do that thing again. I take it, at least most rational people would, right? So I think that's important to this.
Okay, great. And so I like what Gloria said about follow-up feedback, and also what John said. So in one of the organizations I worked, we used to do something called a 360-degree review, where you would give feedback to your subordinates, and your subordinates will also do a review and give you feedback for your own, the way you have managed your subordinates as well. So that way, you're open to critical feedback as a manager, and also your subordinate is open to critical feedback as well. Okay, so our fifth question: how do we manage conflicts that arise, especially with remote teams? So a lot of us work remotely. I'm in Nigeria, for instance, and how do we manage conflicts that could come up, maybe from emails that fly around and cause some issues or tensions in the teams?
Can I ask a question? You're working remotely online. Okay, you're working online.
Yeah.
It's not just purely email, is it? There you do have like Teams meetings and Zoom meetings where you see people.
Zoom meetings, yes.
And you talk to people. It's not that everything is so completely remote that it is just email. It's just email. Okay, I mean, I'm a great believer in the personal and the personal touch, in the sense that if there's a conflict, it could have been because of the tone in an email. Okay, so raising it, and I know in Ghana at least, often people will not voice out the conflict. It won't be readily seen. You may hear it from other people that, oh, XYZ is really upset and it's not doing well because of something you wrote. People generally would not tell you by their actions and their non-actions. That's when you see that perhaps there's some issue. But I said the way to handle it, if there is a way, is the personal touch. You know, if it's an email, or if you hear from somewhere that there's this problem brewing, because nothing stops us. The best thing to do is to have that open, frank discussion, you know, without hiding behind, well, I haven't heard it, so I'm not going to do anything about it. Person may not tell you, but you may hear in a roundabout way. And as a manager, I think it's your responsibility to take the bull by the horns, to speak with the individual, to find out, well, what is the problem? What is the problem? Why has this arisen? Make your expectations clear. Clear the air. Because whether you're working remotely or even in an organization where you see each other daily, conflicts happen, and a lot of the conflicts is misunderstandings. And so being able to get to the root of the misunderstanding is a beginning for, I feel like, managing the situation. Again, John may have more theoretical, analytical ways of helping us understand that. Over to you, John.
Well, I mean, I think in this case, it's important to not be theoretical and analytical about this, but to be pretty practical, given that we have a lot of experience of this now following the pandemic, and that these are emotional, personable relationship issues effectively. So, you know, thinking about just in the theoretical sphere is, I think, the best way to go about it. We want to engage the emotions here as well. So I agree with everything that Gloria's just said about getting to the root of the matter and using that as a means to really find where focus should best be paid. I think the personal touch here as well, which is something that Gloria mentioned, is so important to not just try and solve this via a short email to a group of people, but to say, you know, assuming you can't meet in person here because it's a remote team, you say, hey, can we jump on a Zoom call and chat about this? The closest thing to face that would be, or if that's a possible, phone call. something that, you know, is more personable than a cold email, and try to chat to the people involved individually, depending on how many there are. If there's a team of 20 people involved here, there's conflict. It might be possible to meet with every one of them, but at least a few of the main people involved in the conflict to get each angle and side of the story. And then to try, once you've done that and figured out best next steps, to bring everyone together for a discussion of these issues, such that you're gradually then, you know, not the person having to control it, but they're resolving it among themselves. I think that would be a good 3-step process, building on the first step that Gloria mentioned.
Can I ask you, Farida, how does conflict manifest in EduSpots in the remote areas? I mean, what do you see? What do you hear? How does it show itself?
So conflicts will usually manifest in the teams. Let's say something was supposed to be done and somebody wasn't carried along because they were probably not at the meeting where it was discussed. And then blame starts to be thrown around, and because somebody dropped the ball and the work wasn't done. And so there's a lot of who to blame, who's going to pick up the ball and all of that.
And how do you hear of it? Does somebody tell you that, well, fine, I'm carrying this job because XYZ did not do her task? How does it manifest? How does it show?
Okay, so not necessarily someone deciding to carry it up, but maybe that's in the volunteer meeting, it probably comes up. So in the communities or in the sports, they don't use emails. So it will probably be in terms of somebody saying something to the next person, like maybe this person didn't get this done, and because of this person, something didn't happen. It would, before they get a chance to discuss it centrally in a meeting where the person can speak up for themselves, or let's even know what really happened, there will be maybe word going around that this is the person responsible, and that way there starts to be friction in the team.
Okay, because what I know of Ghanaian culture generally is that there'll be a lot of people talking in the background. Nobody will actually inform the manager that this is the case. So it's a lot of we like to call it rumor mongering and all sorts of sniping going on in the background. So then it becomes one whole big mess, and nobody wants to really point the finger at it was ABC who missed this, and therefore it had the impact on that.
Yeah, you don't want to be seen as the one reporting somebody else.
Exactly, and that makes the manager's job really, really very, very difficult. It makes the manager's job really very difficult. So being able to investigate to find out what exactly happened and why it happened becomes critical if you're going to resolve the conflict, I think.
Okay. Great. So we're rounding up. So now we're going to motivation. How do we stay motivated, especially in underserved communities, all of our sports that are usually in remote communities? How do we stay motivated in our teams as volunteers? What can we do? What practices can we do?
I know, John, do you want to take that?
I'll go first, sure, if you want. So there's a distinction to be drawn between two types of motivation, broadly speaking: intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation being things like external rewards and punishments, being, you know, salary and so on. Intrinsic motivation being things that come from inside yourself, such as your passions, your sense of purpose, your desires, your curiosity, things like that. So it would be useful to see what is motivating the team and the staff in the first place. I take it there's going to be a strong degree of intrinsic motivation for anyone who's trying to do public service and serve a community, and how you can maintain that over time in light of the kinds of factors that might threaten it. You know, for example, if someone isn't seeing their work appreciated, and they feel they're doing really high value work that really does tap into their personal sense of purpose for why they're doing this role, why they see this role as a vocation for them, but they don't really feel they're getting feedback from those they're serving, the recognition for what they're doing, rather they're just being met with a lack of gratitude or even criticism for what they're doing. Trying to look at these kinds of factors, how certain things might threaten sources of motivation, that being a starting point. Theoretically, I'm thinking this in a similar way to burnout, in the sense that you look at the possible causes of burnout as a means of overcoming it and limiting its risk. Similar with motivation, you look at the kind of key motivators a person has and how those could be supported, but also potentially threatened by other factors as a means of maintaining it and boosting it even in the long term. I haven't addressed there the underserved communities side of things. We can come back to that. But Gloria, do you have anything you want to add to build on anything I've just said?
Not really. I think that's absolutely spot on. The intrinsic and the extrinsic motivational factors. I mean, in the remote areas, a lot of that motivation has to be intrinsic from the individuals working, but also by working together, it can also become extrinsic. I mean, one of the things that I know people do very well in Ghana is something as simple as eating together, attending social situations like funerals on behalf of other team members. So I think, although there is the intrinsic satisfaction, anything the management can encourage to bring people together socially in their remote area. Not saying that they should come to Nigeria or they should come to Accra, but if there's some in the village near Elmina, for their media people to perhaps interact more socially with each other, so that they are building themselves up as a team. That can also help with motivating. There are other things that you could do. I mean, competitions and the like. The best this person, the best, giving awards, etc. to people for having achieved different things, and that's of course tapping onto the extrinsic, which of course John talked about the rewards.
Okay, so it's a good thing you mentioned that, because and our conferences can be an avenue to bring people together and then do some activities collectively that can motivate volunteers. In the next 2 months, we have some conferences planned, I think 4 different conferences. So, and that's a way for different units to have volunteers come to different units for mainly, not really educational, but yes, there are other activities that are not sports related, but this is a way to also add motivational activities also, activities that will motivate the volunteers. Okay, so I'll take a last question. We have others, but we don't have time. What about for individuals, myself and some other people here? What can we do in our own lives, in our homes, that will contribute to our own well-being in the workplace, in our private lives?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I'm a great believer in exercise. I'm a great believer in the outdoors. You know, a walk every day does a lot of good to me, to for my mental well-being. Walking early in the morning, I know it's hard in Ghana and Nigeria where it's so hot. Finding a bit of time for yourself, perhaps in the gym, perhaps walking. I think physical exercise is important. Physical exercise. I think there are things such as knowing when to say no, knowing when to stop, not beating yourself up because you have not achieved something, and then you start to beat your own self up. Oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have done that. Trying not to do that. I don't know how easy it is, but it's something that can be learned. Accepting that you don't have all the answers, and that sometimes you have to say no, sometimes you have to stop. I think it wasn't meta recognition that you call it, knowing yourself,
Metacognition,
knowing what works for you. It's something that you should develop, so that you know that, well, I cannot work. If I work after 9 p.m. on any day, it's going to have an impact on my well-being. Therefore, I stop at 8:30. And it's knowing yourself, I think. Physical exercise are important, I think. John?
Yep. Agree with everything Gloria said. Research suggests that the most important thing for our well-being is relationships. Hands down, I highly recommend a book that was recently published by Robert Waldinger and Mark Schulz. It's called The Good Life and How to Live It. It's based on the 80-year study called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, where they've tracked people over 80 years to look at what contributes most to their well-being and happiness. Hands down, good, close social relationships by far the biggest predictor of well-being. In terms of physical well-being, mental well-being, longevity of life, every factor you can imagine. So to really be ensuring that you are focusing on building your closest relationships, they're not being neglected due to work or anything else. Physical exercise is so important. There's growing research on the positive impact that can have for your well-being as a whole, for your performance at work, for your capacity to learn, and so on. Nutrition, making sure that's healthy, but let's also dig into some less general ones, such as, it's the question is, what activities individually, collectively could we do that contribute to well-being in the workplace? Things with your colleagues that generate a sense of camaraderie, so you don't just see them in the workplace, and there is a social aspect to things. Things you can do, like playing a sport together, going to a cafe together, going for dinner together, having some interests you do together, even if it's just a few of them, opening up those kinds of opportunities, like good organizations often do when they say, hey, we've got the staff football team, we've got the staff yoga group, whatever it might be. Things where people can engage with one another about more than just work. And that kind of thing can contribute to creating a good social space, the workplace, which goes back to the first thing I said, cultivating good relationships. Workplace relationships as well are an important source of relationships. They're not just trivial ones. Our colleagues are often not merely acquaintances. They often become good friends. People often form romantic relationships with their colleagues and so on. These are important to attend to, and we can do that by fostering a social aspect to our work lives as well.
Great. So there you have it. Relationships, exercising, nutrition, doing things, fun things collectively. Thank you so much. This has been such an honor. So the recording will be uploaded on YouTube. Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing with us. I hope this has been beneficial to everyone here. Thank you, everybody. We won't have time to ask questions because I think everybody had sent in their questions earlier. So we will end the session right about now. Thank you once again for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Really enjoyed it.
Talking to you. I enjoyed
Thank you,
it.
Frida. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Fad.
See you in
Take
acting,
care.
perhaps. See you in acting sometime.
Yeah.
Hey, I'd love, let's see you in London sometime. That'd be great. Thank you, Gloria.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.